The sun hung low over the wide plains of Coldwater Valley, painting the sky in bruised gold and fading crimson. A single rider moved across that dying light, his horse's hooves stirring up long trails of dust that caught the last of the sun, like smoke from a dying fire. He rode slow, deliberate, like a man who didn't need to hurry because he already knew how this would end. The creak of leather and the jingle of his spurs carried farther than the wind dared. From the window of a weather-beaten ranch house, Clara Bennett pressed her hand to the glass, her heart pounding against her ribs. Beside her, her father coughed into a handkerchief, his fingers tight around a worn rifle. The old boards of the porch groaned as the stranger's horse came to a stop. His shadow stretched long across the dust. No one in Coldwater ever expected mercy from the man in the black hat. Coldwater Valley was a place that could break a man's spirit as easily as it could steal his breath. The land stretched wide and unforgiving, dust devils twisting across empty fields, creeks dried to cracked ribbons, and cattle bones whitening beneath a merciless sun. Once, the Bennett Ranch had been the pride of the valley, its fences straight, its herds strong. But seasons had turned cruel, rain had forgotten their soil, and sickness had claimed more than crops. Clara's father, Thomas Bennett, had borrowed against the land to keep hope alive, believing one more harvest might turn the tide. Instead, the drought took everything but their pride and a roof over their heads. And now, the man riding toward them, Elias Kane, came carrying papers sealed by law and greed. The world outside that door wasn't just dry. It was hungry, and it was here to collect. Clara Bennett had learned early that the land only gave to those who bled for it. Since her mother passed 2 winters ago, she'd become the heart and hands of the Bennett Ranch, mending fences, hauling water, and nursing her father through long nights of fever. The calluses on her palms were proof of her love, and the quiet strength in her eyes came from years of watching the sun rise over the same stretch of stubborn soil. Her father, Thomas, once stood tall, a man whose handshake meant something in Coldwater. But sickness had withered his frame, and the guilt that sat in his chest weighed heavier than the illness. Clara didn't know at first how deep his desperation had gone, how one bad bet at the saloon had cost them the deed to their land. When she finally learned the truth, she didn't cry or curse him. She simply placed a hand on his trembling shoulder and said, "We'll find a way, Pa, I promise." Every morning since, she'd carried that promise like armor. It was hope, thin and fragile as the dawn, but it was all they had left between them. And the dust, Elias Kane dismounted with the quiet grace of a man who'd spent more years in the saddle than beneath a roof. Dust clung to his coat, and the brim of his black hat shadowed eyes that had seen too much of what mercy costs. He reached into his saddlebag and drew out a folded paper, the seal of the county stamped red against the parchment, a deed that said the Bennett Ranch no longer belonged to the Bennetts. Thomas tried to rise, coughing hard, but Clara stepped between them before he could speak. Her fingers trembled, yet her gaze held steady. "Please," she whispered, "he's sick. Just give us time." The wind pushed through the dry grass, carrying the soft jingle of Kane's horse's reins. He looked at her for a long moment, something flickering behind his stoic eyes. Then his voice came low and final. "Time don't change the law, miss. Come sunrise, this land's no longer yours." The sun dipped low, and with it, Clara's last bit of hope seemed to fade. She followed Kane outside as the chill of night crept over the valley. The only light came from a small fire beside the barn, its embers painting his weathered face in shades of orange and sorrow. He sat alone, hands clasped, staring into the flames as though they whispered something only he could hear. "Please," Clara said softly, stepping closer. "There must be some mercy in you." Kane didn't look up right away. When he did, his eyes were tired, not cruel, haunted by memories that didn't belong to this ranch. "Mercy don't change what's owed," he said, "but I'll give you till sunrise." The silence between them stretched wide, filled only by the crackle of burning wood and the distant cry of a coyote. And though she saw pain behind his calm, dawn would still demand its due. The first light of dawn spilled across the valley, soft and gold against the dry earth. Elias stood by his horse, the eviction papers in his hand, the seal catching the morning light. Thomas Bennett waited on the porch, pale and weak, the rifle across his lap trembling in his grip. Clara stepped forward before either man could speak, her heart pounding so loud it drowned the wind. "Take me instead," she whispered, her voice raw but steady. "Just to spare him." The words hung in the air like a prayer too heavy to rise. Kane froze, the breath catching in his chest. For a heartbeat, the valley fell silent. No wind, no birds, only memory. He saw his wife's face, his child's eyes, the family he couldn't save. His fingers trembled, and the paper slipped slightly in his grasp. Duty pulled one way. Mercy pulled the other. Elias mounted his horse in silence, the paper still in his coat pocket, unsigned and heavy as stone. He didn't look back as he rode from the Bennett Ranch, though the echo of Clara's trembling voice followed him like a ghost. The valley stretched before him, endless and empty, but it offered no comfort. Each hoofbeat drummed against the hollow in his chest where conviction used to live. He told himself he'd done what he must, that the law was the law, and feelings had no place in it. But the image of her eyes, soft, tear-bright, and full of forgiveness, cut deeper than any bullet ever could. By the time he reached the ridge overlooking Coldwater, his hands had gone cold on the reins. He could still see their ranch below, small against the vast land he'd come to take. He realized then that a man could obey the law and still lose his soul. Turning his horse around, Elias rode hard toward the rising sun, dust kicking up behind him like smoke. He knew what it meant, losing his job, his reputation, but it didn't matter. For the first time in years, he was riding not for money or duty, but for something far greater. Night fell heavy over Coldwater Valley, the wind sharp with dust and tension. Lanterns bobbed in the dark for riders coming up the road, their silhouettes hard and mean. They carried the arrogance of men who thought the law was theirs to bend. Clara stood on the porch, her father beside her, frail but unyielding. When the riders stopped, one spat into the dirt. "Orders from Mr. Harlan," he sneered. "This land's his now." Before Clara could answer, the sound of hooves thundered from the ridge. Elias Kane rode into the lantern light, his coat whipping in the wind. He dismounted slow, eyes burning with purpose. "Not anymore," he said. Pulling a second paper from his saddlebag, he held it high, the true deed, signed and sealed, proving Harlan's fraud. The men froze, realizing justice had arrived not with bullets, but with truth. In the stillness, redemption spoke louder than any gunshot. Days passed, and the Bennett Ranch breathed again. The fences stood straighter, the roof no longer leaked, and for the first time in months, laughter drifted through the dry morning air. Clara's father, though still weak, found strength returning to his hands. He watched from the porch as Elias worked beside his daughter, hammering, mending, sweating beneath the same sun that once felt like an enemy. There was no talk of what had passed, no grand words of gratitude, just quiet understanding, and the kind of peace that comes when a man lays down his guilt and chooses to begin again. Each dawn, Clara poured 2 cups of coffee, one for herself and one for the man who stayed to help. Their eyes met often but said little. In those moments, love didn't need a name, it simply lived there, unspoken, beneath the wide, forgiving sky. Sometimes redemption rides in wearing the face of a man who once came to take everything away. The wind carried a hush over Coldwater Valley, as if the land itself remembered what had been lost and what had been spared. Mercy had done what bullets and laws never could. It had healed. Elias found peace not through victory, but through the grace of a choice that saved another's heart and his own. And now, dear listener, if you'd been standing where Elias stood, would you have done the same? Sometimes the bravest act isn't to fight but to forgive. If this story touched your heart, hit that like button, share it with someone who believes in second chances, and subscribe for more Wild West tales of love, loss, and redemption.